Welcome to our on-demand video series here with SQL and Azure. Today's focus is going to be a migration demo. I'm TJ Turner here at Synex as a Microsoft Cloud Sales Engineer to step through this process. To get this demo to set up, we're going to use a hands-on lab template that's used by Microsoft, so you can follow along in these links if you would like. Give you a little overview of the environment. Tailspin Toys, a subsidiary of Worldwide Importers, is a developer of several popular online video games. Founded in 2010, the company has experienced exponential growth since releasing the first installment of their most popular game franchise to include online multiplayer gameplay. They have since built upon this success by adding online capabilities to the majority of their game portfolio. Adding online gameplay has dramatically increased the popularity of their games, but the rapid increase in demand for their services has made supporting the current setup problematic. To facilitate online gameplay, they host gaming services on-premise using rented hardware. For each game, their gaming services setup consists of 3 virtual machines running the gaming software and 5 game databases hosted on a single SQL Server 2008 R2 instance. In addition to the dedicated gaming VMs and databases, they also host shared authentication and gateway VMs and databases. As at its foundation, Tailspin Toys is a game development company made up primarily of software developers. The few dedicated databases and infrastructure resources they do have are struggling to keep up with their ever-increasing workload. WWI is hoping that migrating their services from on-premise to the cloud can help to alleviate some of their infrastructure management issues, while simultaneously helping them to refocus their effort on delivering business value by releasing new and improved games. They're looking for a proof of concept for migrating their gamer information web application and database into the cloud, then maintain their gamer information database, Tailspin Toys, on an on-premise SQL Server 2008 R2 database. This system is used by gamers to update their profiles, view leaderboards, purchase game add-ons, and more. Since the system helps to derive revenue, it is considered a business-critical application and needs to be highly available. They're aware that their SQL Server 2008 R2 is approaching end of support, as it did in June of 2019, and are looking for options for migrating this database into Azure. The overall architecture of what they're looking at and what they're going to end with, and the MI stands for Managed Instance. So they're going to move into a SQL Managed Instance, and you'll see why here in the demo. But this is the overall architecture that we're going to go with. So today we're going to focus on performing the assessments, and we're going to do a database assessment on Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance. And you'll see why we're going to do both of those, so you can see the difference in how the assessment looks for both of those Azure SQL options. Then we're going to migrate the database to Azure SQL Managed Instance. Then we're going to update the web application to use the new SQL Managed Instance. We're going to jump into the SQL Server. So now that we have our RDP connection up, we're going to go and open SQL Server Management Studio. Once the login box comes up, we're going to use Windows Authentication and we're going to connect. Here, what we should see in the database section is the Tailspin Toys database. What we're going to then do is create a new query connecting to the master database. And we're going to execute this. Command completed successfully. Now we're going to go over to the Migration Assistant. And that's just to prep the database and the SQL Server for what we're about to do. Once the Data Migration Assistant loads, we're going to select the plus sign on the left-hand side, which is a new assessment. Do an assessment. Give it a name. In our case, we're going to call to Azure SQL DB. Assessment type is a database engine. Source server type is SQL Server, and we're going to go to Azure SQL Database, and we're going to create. We want to check the database compatibility and check feature parity as well. And we'll click Next. Then we give it the server name. And then we'll start the assessment. So here we can see that there's a feature that is not supported in the Azure SQL database. This is the service broker, and that's not a service that is available in the Azure SQL databases. So next, we'll start another assessment. And we'll give this call in here instance. Click create. Again, check the database compatibility, check the feature parity. Click next. As it loads that, then we start the assessment. And here we see right off the bat, as it comes back very quickly, there's no feature parity issues with going into server instance, meaning you can move this into an Azure SQL database managed instance as it is. So what we look for now is compatibility issues, this little radius. So the database, including the service broker feature, can be migrated as is, providing an opportunity for Tailspin Toys to have a fully managed platform as a service database running in Azure. Previously, their only option for migrating a database using features incapable in the Azure SQL database, such as Service Broker, was to deploy the database to a virtual machine running in Azure IIS or Azure Infrastructure as a Service, or modify the database to then remove that Service Broker feature to run in Azure SQL database. The introduction with SQL Managed Instance provides that ability to now migrate the database into a managed Azure SQL database with near 100% compatibility, including all the features that prevented them from using Azure SQL database. So next we're going to do the database migration. So the next exercise, we're going to use the database service, or the DMS, to migrate the Tailspin Toys database from their on-premise SQL server to the SQL managed instance. First, we need to create a network share. Now we want to change the SQL server service account to run under the SQL MI user account, because what we did was we gave this folder permissions from the SQL MI user to actually upload and save things to this share. So the way that we do that is we go again to SQL Configuration Manager. SQL Server Services. And we go into the SQL Server Service, the MS SQL Server. Click on its properties. Use an account. Complete. And now we can see our logon type is a SQL MI user, a local account. Now we want to create a backup, and we go back into the Management Studio. Right click on the database, we go to Tasks, and we do a backup. So we'll see that we have a backup here, tailspintoys.bak, in the root of C. We don't need that anymore, so we'll go ahead and remove that. Then we'll add. And we'll change it to the location of the folder that we just created, called the DMS backup. Give it the file name of Tailspin Toys. .bak. Click OK there. Then we go to Media Options. We want to override all existing backup sets, and we want to perform a checksum when writing to the media, in this case, the disk. And then we select OK to perform the backup. Backup completed successfully. So next, we're going to use the Azure Cloud Shell to retrieve the information necessary to connect to the SQL Server 2008 VM from the DMS. So if we go over here to the Azure portal, in the Cloud Shell. All right, so we set our research group name. Now let's go and grab the IP address from the SQL Server that's in that resource group. Public IP address is here. What we need to do here is grab the output from that public IP address. Copy. And we'll put that in a notepad on the SQL Server just for posterity. Next, we're going to create a service principal. So we'll need to grab our subscription ID, doing that account list. And we're in our Azure University subscription ID, so we'll grab this, copy that, and then we'll put this into a subscription. Variable. Next, we'll create the service principal. And then we'll copy the information here, as we'll need the app ID and the password. And we'll go ahead and put that in our text document as well. So we have that for documentation. This command. Now we need to grant the contributor role. We'll do that by this AZ command. Okay, so now we need to create the migration project. We'll go back to our resource group, the Hands-on Lab SQL. We'll click on the Tailspin Database Migration. Make sure the service is running and create a new migration project. Project name will be on-prem to SQL MI. Our source server type will be SQL Server. Our target server type will be a managed instance. And we'll choose an online data migration. Save. Next, we'll create and run activity. So we give it a name and then start the migration. This process will run and it will give us status updates. So from here, now that everything is in log shipping and in progress, we click on the tailspin and we can see the status is restored, the database type, backup start time. And because we did an online data migration, it's going to be checking that shared folder for any new log shippings that's coming across, any new logs that are being written. That will keep everything in consistency. That way you can do the online and make sure everything's staying consistent while still being live on the other database. So to complete this migration, so we'll go back to the SQL Server Management Studio, back over here on our SQL Server. We'll do a new query against the tailspin database. And we'll execute another query. We added a new record to games, and now another new query and execute this. 4 pages for database on 1 file, backup log successfully processed. Now we return back here to our portal and we do a refresh. And we come back and we see this transaction log status is queued. Do a refresh, kind of watch this process. Okay, so the transaction log is now restored, and we'll start the cutover. No pending backup logs. We'll do the confirm and apply. Progress bar at the bottom here. And completed. So now we can close that. Come back over here and show completed. Now we've successfully migrated the Tailspin Toys database to the Azure SQL managed instance. Next, we want to verify the database transaction log migration. So we'll reconnect our Cloud Shell. We'll set our resource group name, similar to what we did earlier. And then we'll get the SQL managed instance list from our resource group. So let me make this a little bit bigger. We'll scroll through. We can see our list. Now we want to see the fully qualified domain name, the SQL here, subscription ID, and we want to copy all of this, copy the fully qualified domain name, put that in our text document. For reference. Going back to this again, we want to connect to the database engine here. So we go connect database engine. Now that I'm connected, we can see Tailspin Toys here. to this SQL server, the managed instance SQL server. In a new query window, we're going to use Tailspin Toys. And while it's not necessarily a welcome select query, we would not really do this in a larger environment with the select star. We'll execute this, and this should bring back our tables. Space Adventure. That's the row, which we added after the fact, is in both places. Now we want to go and update the web application to use the new managed instance. So we can close this server, bring this back down, go back into our Azure portal, into our hands-on lab, resource group, and we'll go to our jump box. We'll RDP. Once we've logged in, we'll open up the File Explorer. We'll go to C drive, hands-on lab, migrating SQL databases, hands-on lab files, and open up the Tailspin Toys web with the Visual Studio 2019. Now that I'm into Visual Studio, I want to right-click on the Tailspin Toys web, and then select Publish. Once the Publish dialog comes up, I want to select Azure, click Next. Azure App Services, Service Windows, next. I'll go to my resource group, collect the Azure App Service that's in my resource group for the hands-on lab, and click Finish. Now we're here, we'll select Publish. And look for the build document output here, started, and we'll wait for that to succeed. So upon the success, it then opens up the web page, which should come back with an error. Because it comes back with an error because the database string has not been changed from what we were using in our on-prem. So what we need to do is update the app service configuration. So if we go back to our portal, back to our resource group, and we go back to our app services, Go to configuration. And then we find connection string. Then we need to select the pencil icon for the Tailspin Toys context. So go here and edit the Tailspin Toys. In the connector string, the value looks what we expect it to. In the add edit connection string dialog, we're going to replace the SQL host FQDN value with our fully qualified domain name from our SQL managed instance that we copied into our text earlier. So let's go over back to that and grab that document. This is our fully qualified domain name. And put that here. Click OK. And we'll do the same thing here for the Tailspin Toys read only context. And then we click Save. Continue. So we want to click on the overview. Then we select the URI here. We'll copy this. And put that in the browser. We still have an error because what the next steps would be to continue on with this hands-on lab to get the web page to work is to integrate the app services with this virtual network to set on this point to site. So it's still leveraging some of the resources that you still have on-prem, but the SQL server has now been migrated and is running in your Azure SQL managed instance. The app services is now pointing to the correct database, and you should be able to move through the rest of this lab. This concludes our on-demand video for today about migrating on-prem SQL Server 2008 to a SQL Server managed instance. Thank you for joining us here at Synex.